We interrupt this regularly scheduled video for a late-breaking event. We go live now to our man on the scene, Tim. Tim, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. This is the man, the myth, the mustache, Tim, and I cannot believe what is going on behind me. It is so exciting. Apparently there is a new video coming out on this channel, and it has so much going on in it. It is part 19 of What If Deku Could Use Haki. There is so much happening in the video, and oh my goodness, that's in it too! Oh, I will be reporting this as we go on for the next 20 to 30 minutes. I don't know how long it'll take. So, if you are listening to this video, please sit down, stay home, and relax and enjoy this. It is going to be quite the ride. Rayleigh stood as still as a statue, forgetting to both blink and breathe. What Midoriya just told him wasn't something he expected to hear, just as it was something he didn't want to hear. Two villains, both incredibly dangerous on their own, were potentially working together, and both of them could use Haki. What should we do? Midoriya asked, knocking the silver-haired geezer out of his state of shock. Rayleigh pinched the bridge of his nose before thinking. This wasn't something he could simply ignore. The fact that Shigaraki had the Conqueror spirit all this time was a terrifying thought, even for him. The villain probably doesn't care about collateral damage. As such, he would ignore trying to contain its radius. But that wasn't the only scary thing. There's also the fact that facing both Midoriya and Rayleigh had probably made the villain stronger. The silver-haired geezer kept thinking, until he remembered what Midoriya had told him about Night-Eye.
You told me that Night-Eye was a Haki user, correct?
Rayleigh asked, while still thinking. Midoriya looked at his master quite nervously as he answered, Yes. Rayleigh finished his thoughts upon hearing these words, before he told Midoriya what he needed to do.
I need to have a talk with Night-Eye. I can't ignore this matter. Let me know next time you go to see him. I'll come with you,
Rayleigh said, sounding more calm than he looked. Midoriya only nodded at this response before saying, Until then, we need to up everyone's training, especially mine. Rayleigh was surprised to hear this. He agreed that the others needed more training, but he never thought that his own student would say that willingly. The silver-haired geezer smiled, for he saw a golden opportunity ahead of him.
Alright, let's see if we can train Koda while we're at it. Also, there's a certain technique that I've been wanting to teach you,
Rayleigh said, wearing his usual smile. Midoriya was intrigued after hearing this. He had been wanting to train Koda for some time now, but he really wanted to know what Rayleigh had in store for him.
I use this technique against All for One. It's called flowing Haki, or Ryuo. It involves letting your armament Haki flow into your opponent's body, causing internal damage,
the silver-haired geezer said, wearing a confident smile. Midoriya was a little shocked to hear all of this. He recognized that it was what Rayleigh had done to All for One, but what he told him to do was insanely difficult. He was more or less telling Midoriya to manifest his armament Haki outside of his own body without a medium. The green-haired boy gulped at the idea of how difficult this was going to be, but he was still determined to make it work. Rayleigh wore an even wider smile upon witnessing his student's reaction. He already knew that Midoriya would manage to pull it off, but now he knew that it wouldn't be a problem. Class 1A was thrown into an even harsher training regimen than before, all thanks to both Rayleigh and Midoriya. The master and student told Mandalay about Haki, and managed to convince her to let Koda be trained by them. Midoriya, meanwhile, was struggling with his own type of training. Rayleigh had already told him how Ryuo worked, but that didn't make it any less difficult. The green-haired boy couldn't pull it off, sometimes training for hours without any form of results, but he still kept going at it, refusing to give up. Training kept going until the day finally came. Midoriya received a message from Night-Eye, telling him to come to the agency without his hero costume. The green-haired boy found this somewhat confusing, but he didn't question too much. He quickly informed Rayleigh before they both took off. During their travels, they both noticed that Kirishima, Uraraka, and Asui were all headed in the same direction. Then they met the big three at the agency. Both Rayleigh and Midoriya were confused by now, even more so when noticing all the heroes were waiting inside. Rayleigh wore a skeptical look, not knowing what was going on. His intention was just to talk to Night-Eye about their villain problem, but it would seem that he picked one of the most peculiar times to do so. The silver-haired geezer was about to say something until he was interrupted when Night-Eye called for everyone to enter a meeting room. The next few minutes were spent trying to get everyone seated, during which Rayleigh's presence was recognized. Everyone wondered why he was there, and that is when Night Eye spoke up. "You're Mr. Rayleigh, correct? I don't remember inviting you," the hero said with a cold voice. Rayleigh looked at the man unamused as he said,
"I invited myself. Besides, judging from what I've already been told, this matter could concern me directly."
Night Eye barely flinched upon hearing this. He just looked skeptical while muttering, "From what you've been already told?" Night Eye's gaze slowly made its way over to the green-haired boy that was next to Rayleigh. Midoriya noticed his gaze and he looked towards him and said, "No offense, sir, but I trust him more than you. Do you honestly expect me to trust a man that I just met, rather than the man I've known for more than 10 years? The entire room was silent upon hearing this. Midoriya was the very definition of bold. His words were proof enough. Not only did he go against a direct order from Night Eye, he even had the guts to say he wasn't trustworthy. Everyone turned their gaze over to Night Eye, waiting for his response. The hero fixed his glasses back into place before he spoke up. "Expecting you to trust me more than your own master is nothing short of an insult to the both of you. I apologize," Night Eye said, sounding genuinely sorry. The entire room went still in shock. They had expected Night Eye to scold Midoriya in some way, but instead he actually apologized. "I have to say, I'm glad you're here, Mr. Rayleigh. Your presence will make explaining much easier," Night Eye said, sounding as calm as he usually did. Rayleigh looked at the hero confused until he frowned upon realizing something.
"Why do I not like where you're going with this?"
the silver-haired geezer uttered. Night Eye just ignored the old man's comment before getting on with the meeting. Night Eye and Bubble Girl went over the details and evidence that they had gathered so far, even talking about what Ryukyu and Fat Gum had to add. Quirk erasing bullets, quirk enhancing drugs, even the League of Villains. It was all brought up and connected to the Shiya Hasaikai. But when Eri was mentioned, it suddenly took a dark and disgusting turn. They couldn't say for certain, but it was the most likely scenario. Chisaki was turning Eri's body into bullets. Midoriya clenched his fists in both anger and frustration. So did Mirio. The girl was right there in front of them. Midoriya even knew how bad Chisaki was, but they didn't do anything.
"If only these two amateurs had gotten the girl away from him, it would have saved us a lot of trouble," Rocklock scoffed, showing his annoyance.
"The blame is all on me. These two did nothing." Night Eye tried to speak, but was caught up by the sound of wood breaking. Everyone looked to see that it was Midoriya, slamming his fist into the table. The green-haired boy locked his gaze onto Rocklock, staring angrily, before a powerful wave was shot out of him. The entire room went dead silent, filling everyone's face with an expression of shock as this powerful aura engulfed them all. Rayleigh, Night Eye, Aizawa, and the students from 1A all knew what this was. Midoriya was taking his anger out with Conqueror's Haki. The wave then disappeared, and sound returned to the world once more. Almost everyone in the room was shell-shocked, regardless if they were pros or not. They didn't know what that was, but it shook their entire spirit. "Midoriya, I believe that was uncalled for," Night Eye said annoyingly, looking like he was less affected by the wave. Midoriya was about to say something, but was beaten to it by Rayleigh.
"No, it was perfectly justified. This pro needs to learn how to shut the hell up, and I must commend Midoriya for being able to show restraint. He could have easily knocked you all out just now, and you wouldn't be able to do a damn thing about it,"
the silver-haired geezer said, sounding more annoyed by the second. The entire room went completely silent, all for different reasons. Those who didn't understand wondered what was happening, and how Midoriya was so powerful. Those who did understand were shocked that neither Midoriya nor Rayleigh were trying to hide what had just happened. Well, that is one way to introduce it. I was hoping to do it in a more formal way, but this will do just fine, Night Eye said, acting like he was unaffected once again. Now, there were mixed feelings in the room. Those who didn't know were confused, those who did were shocked, and both Rayleigh and Midoriya frowned when realizing that the old man's comment from before had been for a good reason. Everyone looked towards Night Eye as he spoke. What Midoriya just did is called Haki. It's a power that can be used without a quirk, and it allows the user to perform extraordinary feats. Anyone can learn to use Haki, but only a few like Midoriya and Rayleigh can bring out its full potential. Like we mentioned before, we have reasons to believe that the Shiya Hasaikai has teamed up with a League of Villains, but there's more to it. Thanks to the information that Midoriya was able to gather, we now believe that both Chisaki and Shigaraki are Haki users. The room fell silent once more. No one knew how to process this. All of this new information. It was hard to believe that it existed, but Midoriya just proved that it was real. I was hoping that you all would be a little resilient to Haki, since you're pro heroes, but it turns out I was wrong. Midoriya wasn't even using half of his full power just now, and none of you could stand up to it. There are only 3 people in this room that are equipped to deal with this situation, including me, Nadai said, sounding a little disappointed. The pros hung their heads in shame, recognizing the other 2 as Midoriya and Rayleigh. The silence was broken again when Nadai spoke. We need more planning before we go through with this. I trust you gave the other students Haki training during that time, the hero said as he looked towards Midoriya and Rayleigh. The silver-haired geezer thought for a second before he answered.
Don't worry, I'll make sure to include the big 3 as well.
Nadai nodded at this before proceeding to wrap up the meeting. Midoriya looked towards the other students in the room, wearing a determined expression. It would be much more difficult from now on, and the others needed to be able to handle it. The students all looked back at him with determined expressions of their own, especially Mirio. Training was suddenly cranked up to a whole new level of insanity. The students that were involved in the case were being pushed to their absolute limits. The students from 1A managed to improve their Haki significantly, while the big 3 seemed to be struggling with it. Midoriya struggled day in and day out, trying to make Ryuo work, and his labors eventually bore fruit. It was hard to manifest, and it was almost random, but Midoriya managed to use Ryuo. He would need more training to use the technique more efficiently, but there wasn't any time for that. One night, everyone woke up to a message from Night-Eye. The day had finally come. The students made haste, getting their hero costumes on before heading out. They met up with Night-Eye and the other pro heroes before quickly going over the plan. After that, they made their way to the target. Everyone stood gathered outside of the Yakuza HQ, nervously waiting for what's about to go down. The UA students were all weary, but not Midoriya. He and Rayleigh were standing passive-aggressively, staring at the gate without moving a single muscle. The green-haired boy was determined to rescue Eri this time, and he didn't care who was in the way. Rayleigh was right behind Midoriya, and he intended to help his student no matter what happened. Everything was still for a moment, until both Rayleigh and Midoriya could sense something big charging at the gate.
Get back!
The silver-haired geezer shouted, while he and Midoriya ran up ahead. No one had time to react to this exclamation before a hulking figure charged straight through the gate, knocking many officers away. Midoriya and Rayleigh were quick on their feet, grabbing anyone they could and dragging them to safety. Meanwhile, Ryukyu, Hado, Uraraka, and Asui were quick to knock out and restrain the villain. The police then entered a close brawl with the Yakuza members that were swarming out, which in turn allowed for a group of Night-Eye, Rocklock, Fat Gum, Midoriya, Rayleigh, Aizawa, Mirio, Amajiki, Kirishima, Uraraka, and Asui to run inside. They maneuvered their way through the building, eventually finding the hidden passage to the underground facility. They made haste downstairs, hoping to quickly find Overhaul, but would be both shocked and angry upon reaching the end. Once they got to the very end of the staircase, the group realized there was no hallway. There was just a massive wall. Midoriya was about to shout in anger, but was stopped when Mirio spoke up. "Wait, I'll use my quirk to see what's behind it," the blonde said, before taking off his visor and walking up to the wall. He then went through the wall before turning back and saying, "The hallway continues beyond this wall." Everyone was slightly aggravated upon hearing this, realizing that Overhaul must have been placing a near-infinite number of walls behind him in order to cover his tracks. Mirio looked more annoyed than anyone else. They needed to get to Eri quickly, and they won't reach her if the entire group gets caught on the walls. He clenched his fist hard before saying, "I'm going ahead. We don't have enough time," before slipping through the wall and taking off. Not-Eye wanted to shout and stop Mirio, but didn't when realizing that what he said was true. Overhaul was going to escape, so they didn't have enough time to sit around and wait. After Mirio was far away, Midoriya ran up and threw a Haki-infused punch at the wall. A massive hole was made in it, revealing the remainder of the hallway just like Mirio had told them. The group then continued on their way, but they barely got to take a single step before the walls began to twist and turn like they were made of liquid. The group began to lose their footing, leaning themselves against the ever-turning walls for balance. They all knew that one of Overhaul's men had the ability to take over and manipulate different objects, but they never imagined he would do it at this scale. If they wanted to proceed, they needed to take him out, But to do that, they needed to find him first. Midoriya's levels of frustration rose dramatically. He couldn't find this person. He seemed to slip away from within the walls over and over again. "Damn it, where are you?" the green-haired boy shouted in frustration, on the verge of just using Conqueror's Haki and being done with it.
Calm down, Midoriya. You won't get anywhere if your mind is clouded.
Rayleigh shouted, sensing the conflict with his student. Midoriya looked at his master and realized he was right. He wasn't thinking straight, and it wasn't the first time either. Almost every time he's ended up in a bad situation, he let his anger and emotions get the better of him. But he wouldn't let that happen this time. The green-haired boy took a deep breath and closed his eyes, letting his mind fall into deep tranquility. He shut out everything in the outside world, letting his observation Haki slowly analyze the area. The person he was looking for was within one of the walls. As such, he needed to both find him and use an attack that could actually reach him. After just a few seconds, he could feel the presence of his target, and he knew exactly what to do. Midoriya opened his eyes and took action immediately. He leaped to one of the walls, the exact place where his target was, and raided his fist. A normal punch wouldn't be enough to reach him, but what Midoriya planned on doing was far from a normal punch. He reeled his fist back, coating it with Haki, before throwing it at the wall. It made no more than a dent upon collision, but that quickly changed. The wall suddenly broke apart, shooting out an unconscious man as it did. Everyone looked at the scene in shock, as the hallway stopped twisting. It wasn't just that Midoriya had managed to find the man, it was the way he took him out. The wall didn't break in a normal fashion. It shattered from the inside out. Rayleigh grinned upon witnessing this, for it was a huge step forward. What Midoriya did wasn't just a normal Haki-infused punch. He had managed to use Ryuo at will. The old man walked up to his student, patting him on the back while saying,
"Well done. Took you long enough to get there."
Midoriya grinned back at his master while panting lightly. "I hate to ruin the moment, but we should keep moving forward," Night Eyes said, interrupting Midoriya and Rayleigh's moment. The two quickly got back to their senses before taking off with the rest of the group. Mirio didn't stop for anything. He just kept going. He knew that Eri was up ahead. He didn't need to use his pathetic excuse for observation Haki to know that. She was here, and she was in need of saving. That is why he refused to stop. He even went as far as to channel 10% of One for All, the most that he could manage right now, just so he could get there faster. The blonde eventually caught up with Overhaul and attempted to surprise attack him, but to no avail. The villain sensed his entry and immediately created a stone structure to block off the attack. Mirio staggered backwards when this happened, gritting his teeth as he did. Overhaul sensed his attack coming, which meant he had a well-trained observation Haki, on top of the armament Haki that Midoriya had already informed them of. The blonde didn't know what to do. He barely knew anything about Haki, and he was about to engage an opponent who clearly knew what he was doing. Mirio continued to grit his teeth until his gaze landed on Eri. She was scared. If Mirio didn't do anything right now, she would have to suffer through more pain, and he couldn't let that happen. The blonde steeled himself, deciding that he would have to defeat Overhaul regardless of the circumstances. Overhaul looked unamused, staring Mirio down with cold and dead eyes as he slowly removed his gloves. The blonde hero saw this as his opportunity, so he charged the villain with One for All over his entire body. Overhaul wasn't even fazed by this. He just created stone spikes to fend off the blonde hero. Mirio gritted his teeth once more as he permeated through the spikes in an attempt to reach Overhaul again. The villain would see this coming, however, and would once again block with a stone structure. This exchange continued repeatedly, achieving the same result over and over again. Mirio would try to charge Overhaul, only to be stopped in some way. Eventually, the blonde hero grew tired and slowed down, which led to him taking severe damage. Mirio didn't know what to do, for nothing was working. He just couldn't hope to match Overhaul when he was using observation Haki, and he couldn't reach the girl that was standing behind the villain. The blonde hero felt the despair wash over him as his vision got blurry. The world was now unclear to him, but he could faintly make out what was happening. Mirio was barely able to keep his balance, while the monster that was Overhaul dug his cold glare into him. A faint point of what looked to be a massive stone spike then came charging at him, but Mirio couldn't muster up the strength to avoid it. He just stood there on trembling legs, struggling to keep himself up. What felt like an eternity passed as the blonde stood there. The spike was inching closer and closer by the second, but he wouldn't be able to avoid it. It would pierce his body, and that would be it. He waited until he thought he could feel it, but that's when it stopped. The sound of stone breaking filled his ears as Mirio's vision came back to him. The spike had been shattered by something, but it wasn't by him. Two figures stood in front of him, the figures of a familiar old man and a student.
Did you leave the party without us, Blondie?
The old man said as he turned his gaze towards the blonde. Mirio smiled gently upon hearing this, for help had now arrived. Rayleigh's smile never left his face as he saw Mirio. The blonde had been able to hold his own against a dangerous opponent. That was commendable. The silver-haired geezer watched as Night-Eye carried Mirio away before turning back to Overhaul. The villain wore a cold expression, barely reacting to the group that had entered the room. He just stood there, unamused. Behind him was none other than Eri, and she looked terrified. Rayleigh only needed a quick glance to determine his course of action as he said,
I assume that you're Chisaki. I've heard a lot about you, and all the trouble you've been causing. You're strong, I'll give you that. But not even you can handle this many people on your own.
As he raised a Haki-infused fist. As if responding to Rayleigh's declaration, Midoriya also raised his fist. Then Uraraka, Kirishima, Asui, and Night-Eye all followed in a similar fashion. For what seemed to be the first time in forever, Overhaul was surprised. He wasn't impressed by any of the heroes. He could feel what was within them. He could tell they were all Haki users, but his surprise wouldn't last long. He could tell how little experience most of them had. Out of all of them, only the silver-haired man, the green-haired boy, and Night-Eye were any form of threat. If that wasn't enough, the old man had made a horrible mistake with his statement. I must commend you for your power, but I can tell that all but 3 are novices. And you're mistaken, old man. Who said I was alone? The mask-wearing villain said, sounding just as cold as ever. Both Rayleigh and Midoriya were confused by Overhaul's statement until they realized something. They didn't get to think any further upon it, however, before being interrupted by something incredibly dangerous approaching them at rapid speeds. Jump! Midoriya shouted in panic before leaping towards the ceiling. Everyone did as Midoriya instructed and jumped. Uraraka! Midoriya shouted, which in turn prompted the brown-haired girl to make everyone levitate. Just seconds after jumping, everyone could see how the ground below them began to crumble and decay. The level of destruction left everyone horrified, until they turned to the source of it. Midoriya's eyes widened with anger as he saw the familiar pale and hand-covered figure standing. The figure stared back at Midoriya before wearing a sadistic smile and saying, Long time no see, Midoriya. Everyone either frowned or cowered at the sight of Shigaraki. Midoriya was right. He was working with Overhaul. Not only that, he'd been training. That's not a normal decay. It's spreading to things he isn't touching, Night-Eye said, perfectly explaining what just happened. Rayleigh frowned upon hearing this as he said, He's combining his decay with Haki, and letting it spread to the ground. Everyone was either horrified or angered upon hearing this, realizing just how dangerous he had become. Midoriya was about to say something, but stopped himself when sensing something else approaching. Uraraka, release! The green-haired boy shouted in a panic, which in turn prompted Uraraka to do so. Everyone landed on the ground just before multiple Haki-infused spikes shot out of the ceiling above them. Everyone was gripped by even more horror, realizing that those spikes would have pierced them if Midoriya hadn't seen it coming. Midoriya, Rayleigh, and Night-Eye glared at both Overhaul and Shigaraki, realizing how bad the situation was. They were the only ones who had any hope of standing up to these villains, but that wasn't the only worrying part. What was worrying was that both villains could attack the other group members, or Eri, at any time. They were basically held hostage. Their only hope would be to fight them both at the same time, while the others would try to get Eri to safety. Midoriya could feel how his scarred arm was aching for revenge on Shigaraki as he spoke up. I'll handle Shigaraki. Can I leave Overhaul to the 2 of you? The green-haired boy said. Both Rayleigh and Night-Eye looked surprised at first, but they quickly shook it off before nodding in confirmation. Midoriya then turned to the others and simply said, Save Eri and don't die! Before turning his fierce expression to the heartless demon that was Tomura Shigaraki. And that's our video for the day, so thank you all for indulging yourselves in our story thus far. I hope you have enjoyed it. Now, there are a few more things I want to go over before the video ends. First, we have a second channel called Anime Deep Dive. Anime Deep Dive goes over the hard facts and lore of a wide variety of anime, which is sure to expand your weeb knowledge of all kinds, guaranteed. On top of that, we have a third channel called We the Celestials Naruto What Ifs. It's what we do here on this channel, but in the vast world and lore of Naruto. So go check that out if you're in the mood for some jutsu action. Secondly, on behalf of We the Celestials, I want to thank everyone involved in the production of today's awesome content. Their details will be in the description below. And finally, if you're interested in what we do here at We the Celestials, I want to extend an invitation to join our team. We only have one caveat: you must be 16 years or older to join our crew. You can sign up for whichever category fulfills your interests by joining the recruitment Discord in the description below. Our Discord is an all-around fantastic place to be, whether you're a fan or you're looking to join our band of misfits. And so that's it from us for today's video. So thank you all for watching, and please have a great day. And before I go, once again, I do hope everyone is taking care of themselves mentally and physically, even spiritually if you're into that. Do better for yourself and by yourself every day. Some days are going to be rougher than others, but make it through those rough days, and you'll have nice, good, smooth days throughout. As always, you never know what everybody is going through, so be kind to others and be kind to yourselves. A little bit of kindness can lead to a life of happiness. This has been Tim, Mustache out.